Mayor Butler, we actually have several people that are going to be commenting on this exact topic, and we have a pretty structured, intentional series of things to share with you. So we would ask the courtesy of both you and the commissioners to allow us to speak in that prepared order.
Okay, now we do have some time limits on speaking and things like that, so.
Sure, it's syntactic though. There's a logical order of the things you'll be hearing.
Okay.
It may be the most efficient use of everyone's time tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everyone. My name is Doug Benson, 233 Harvey Drive in the Dix edition of Northview from the Northview Rising Neighborhood Group. My family and I have lived in the same address for 41 years and have enjoyed our neighborhood and our neighbors greatly during this time. However, we've always questioned why Northview, with its over 7,000 residents, has no secular civic indoor space for meetings and other types of gatherings and events, no restaurants, no bars, no library, no civic spaces. Our schools are no longer available to us due to security restrictions. We've been restricted to meeting in each other's homes and parks and streets, and for a while at the Vineyard Community Church. We've made these spaces work, but they're not always available. They're not always feasible nor ideal. Imagine our delight then when our Parks and Recreation Department began planning a recreation center near Eisenhower Middle School in 2018. Finally, we thought this situation could be rectified. I cannot take credit for the original idea that was largely conceived by Eileen Wong, who was a curator for the Beach Museum at K-State and a Northview resident. A place for social, cultural, artistic, educational, and physical and mental health related outreach to our community, but especially a place where we could address issues of food insecurity and health equity, food distribution, vaccination clinics, nutrition education, cooking classes. Out of these ideas came a list of uses and benefits to the Northview neighborhood, with some ideas for Manhattan community partners who could help make that happen. In September of 2018, at the second meeting of the steering committee for the two recreation centers, members of what was then the Greater Northview Action Team, some of us who were on the steering committee and others who were not, presented a proposal that would expand the Eisenhower Center into a true community center. These ideas were met enthusiastically by architect Tracy Anderson, who requested a copy of our talking points, and Parks and Recreation Assistant Director Wyatt Thompson both mentioned that this was exactly the kind of community input that they were hoping to receive. By December of 2018, the 2018 meeting of the steering committee then, planners had redesigned the two buildings to include a second story with a walking running track, a multi-purpose technology room, and a framed-in kitchen. We were greatly encouraged. But then came a double setback. Number one, there was not enough money left in the budget for the kitchen equipment itself, and due to code restrictions, the kitchen could not be just a basic kitchen, but had to be a commercial one with an industrial exhaust hood and at an estimated cost of $50,000. Despite these decisions by the city, the needs of the Northview community have not changed. It is clearly unreasonable and inequitable to expect the residents of Northview, who live in one of the most economically marginalized parts of Manhattan and who are already paying taxes for the construction of the center, to take on this funding project ourselves. The Commission has previously stated its desire to create two equal centers, but that does not take into account the fact that the Anthony Center is located in a much more affluent part of town with many more resources and far better access to meeting spaces. Equal is not the same as equitable. Northview desperately needs a truly accessible, usable, and welcoming community center, and as we have pointed out regularly in communications with the city manager's office, the pandemic has only exacerbated the needs of our neighborhood. The solution then lies with you, with the City Commission itself now, by identifying a funding source for the build-out of the Eisenhower Community Center kitchen in this budget cycle. Thank you very much.
am Patricia Satterley, and I live at 1915 Lilac Lane in the Northview area. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about, I came from a small community in central Kansas, and a series of events caused them to have to build an activity center in their community. It has far more opportunities and spaces than we're going to have at this Eisenhower community. But one thing that they do have, in addition to a concession stand, is a kitchen. And in that kitchen space, and I know part of the reason for adding these centers in these communities is to add the gyms, to be able to host tournaments, to bring business, that tournament to town, so we have more visitors to town, which is going to be wonderful. But there's also opportunities then for local agencies, clubs, organizations. If you have a kitchen, in addition to having just a regular concession stand, they can do their own fundraisers. You know, maybe if it's a basketball tournament, you can have the baseball team doing sloppy joes and those kinds of things. And you really wouldn't maybe be able to do some of that if you just had a concession stand without having that kitchen experience. We also use that kitchen in that local activity center for weddings, funerals, all those different kinds of things that people could rent that space for, that maybe would be more conducive to a smaller arena versus some of the other things that are available, something close to those people who live in that Northview neighborhood. And I did bring with me today, and I'll leave it just for review. I don't know where you guys are at on fee schedules for those kinds of things, for renting the rooms and whatnot, but they have it listed on here what they're charging. So if you were going to rent a meeting room, they're only charging you $10 per hour. If you were going to rent the kitchen, it was $10 per hour. And then they have some other requirements and things on there. But what I wanted to say in addition was that activity center really was the hub of that community. Like, a lot of things happened there. It wasn't just sports. It was people who would come to give presentations. It would be like the senators coming to talk. It would be the high school doing programming there. It would be the extension office. It would be the health department. It would be the hospital offering things there. So it really was the hub of the community. I could really see that happening in Northview. If we were able to expand that, it would be used and people could take advantage of that. And the idea of just adding that would contribute to the well-being of the community, giving people opportunity to get to someplace close to them to be able to do and learn and grow in those experiences. I think you'd be surprised how much different it would make that area, that people really would come there, and it would be a huge benefit. The other thing on this fee schedule, it talks about if you're a nonprofit, and I called them today just to clarify because I was pretty sure that this was the way it went. But if you're a nonprofit organization and you're going to provide an event or an activity at the community center, they didn't charge you any of these fees to be able to do that because it was a benefit for the community. And you have staff there anyway, but there are some rules to that, like you have to clean up your own mess. If you're going to come there and use the facility, you're responsible for making sure it's as good as when you left it. And so I'm hopeful and excited that we can get those things in place, and it'll be exciting to see it come alive and really be a hub for that Northview community. So I'll just leave this here, and if you guys wanted to share, you don't have to recreate the wheel maybe in that experience. So thank you.
Yeah, I want to interject. The public comment was supposed to be about Social Services Advisory Board, and the topic you're talking about has nothing to do with the Social Services Advisory Board.
I
So
respectfully disagree in the
Well, but the point is, that's what it was. So what I've done is, my assumption was you were all going to talk about Social Service Advisory Board, and you're not talking about that. So what I want to do is terminate the public comment on this until the end of the meeting. You will be able to finish, but we want to put it in the right context because, our next topic was supposed to be special alcohol funds, which might be related. And once they're done, then we can continue with the discussion because it's gone on the direction that doesn't fit the agenda. So at this point, can we go with the Social Services Special Alcohol Funds Committee? On the agenda, we're going to add the rest of this discussion since the folks are here and there's no sense delaying it till the first meeting in July, which probably would have been the right time agenda-wise to put it on there. But what we have here is actually another topic which is related to social services, and that would be to place a kitchen in the Eisenhower Rec Center, and I guess a commercial kitchen. And so we had 2 speakers already. I think there's a third one probably.
Thank you. I'm Suzanne Gleemore, and I live at 1405 Nichols Street, and tonight I do want to share my thoughts regarding the Eisenhower Community Center. Specifically, the role it can play in addressing issues like food insecurity and health equity in the Northview community, and why the Manhattan City Commission needs to identify funds in the budget currently under consideration to finish that kitchen out and equip the space in the center. Inequity is a systemic problem that Northview faces. Data and research from the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition and the Riley County Health Department make this explicitly clear in the Riley County Opportunity Map Index. Compared to other areas of Manhattan, Northview is disproportionately and negatively impacted by food insecurity, poor transportation infrastructure, and worse overall health outcomes. 100% of Northview is in a food desert, which is a result of poor overall planning. We have some of the highest rates of unaffordable housing in the state, and people in Northview die younger than people living in other neighborhoods in Manhattan, on average between 5 and 10 years earlier than people living just a few miles to the west. Publicly funded projects attempting to address community needs in Northview must begin by addressing the known problems of food scarcity in Northview and the lack of localized, equitable access to amenities that promote general health and well-being. The Eisenhower Community Center requires a functional kitchen to meet Northview's needs. And while the city committed to roughing in space for a kitchen in 2019 in response to community advocacy, it's failed to commit to securing kitchen equipment. It's left that burden of either writing grants or securing additional funding on the community. That is, the city is making an economically marginalized community pay for a project that was supposed to support that same community's interests and well-being. And this isn't a singular event. That pattern is fundamentally inequitable and unethical, and here's why. Northview has consistently been economically and politically harmed by city policies, from flood risk mitigation and land management policies to a lack of access to safe and affordable housing, to regressive and ineffective tax policies, to publicly funded projects that do not reflect the needs of all community stakeholders. All of these policies directly and disproportionately hurt economically vulnerable community members, and by ignoring these advocacy efforts, shut out important community voices. We have a petition with over 130 signatures from Manhattan residents, and I will leave that with you, taxpayers and voters. We all reject the city's lack of equitable community engagement and failure to make this publicly funded project relevant for community stakeholders. You heard earlier all the ways in which it can be relevant. These signatories support making the Eisenhower Community Center a space with the capacity to meet known community needs. That includes a fully functioning kitchen with the equipment paid for by the city, either through funding allocation or through city staff securing additional grant funding. Food insecurity touches all aspects of social services in our community and has a distinctly acute impact on Northview. Funding this equipment is a powerfully effective way for the city to begin addressing some of the core inequities that Northview experiences as a result of city planning and policies. We know that proactive community support is economically a wiser and far more effective financial investment than reactive social service. A one-time expenditure for kitchen equipment is less expensive by a lot and more effective by far in addressing ongoing needs that stem from the systemic problems I've named. It's also what the community and your voting constituency needs, and it's what we're asking for. Thank you for listening.
Can I ask a question? You have a kitchen. Let's say you get a kitchen. Then what? Who's going to cook food? Who's going to serve it? Where are you going to get it? How does that solve a foods insecurity issue? Would it be better to get the bread basket, to put a second location? Is that, I don't understand, is it the fact that there's no grocery store in the area? First of all, let's start with how would having a kitchen available, because the city is going to want to charge people to use it, or because someone's going to have to maintain it and clean it up. How will that solve food issues? And wouldn't a breadbasket second location be better? Or explain to me how this is going to solve a food insecurity issue by having a kitchen that the city provides. I haven't heard that part of the argument so far.
So I would say that there's layers and layers and layers to that. I don't think a kitchen will solve all food insecurity issues, right?
Andrew wants to answer this question, I'm thinking.
But yes, I will let him talk, and if you want me to come back.
Okay, somebody address that at some point during the presentation.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, don't count me on time for this. So I actually have 3 questions in response to that. Can everyone hear me? I have 3 really pointed questions.
We're not going to change the rules. The rules for public comment are still timed.
Sure, I'm responding to
But also,
Commissioner
our rules for
Hadisall's.
public comment do not allow dialogue and discussion, but
So should I indulge the question or no?
you can.
I can. Is it going to come at the consequence of
Yes,
that?
it will. Yes, it will.
I won't answer your question then, because you're handicapping me.
Send me an email sometime.
I absolutely will. Thank you for not starting my time yet. Who was ever in charge of that? That was a good highbrow thing. Well, I'm up here now. Wow, that happened fast. Hey, my name is Andrew Elliott. I live at 2108 Prairie Lea Place. And tonight, I want to share some observations regarding the Eisenhower Community Center, obviously. Specifically, my concerns regarding city staff and officials' lack of equitable conduct in the development of this project, as well as their dismissal of issues like food insecurity and health equity in the Northview community. In that, I'm going to explain why the Manhattan City Commission needs to identify a funding source in the current budget to purchase and install kitchen equipment for the Eisenhower Center as both an ethical and financially practical solution. From inception and design all the way through to maintenance and operation, publicly funded projects like the Eisenhower Center must be equitable. That means equitable community engagement, identification of community needs that are sourced from the people that these projects are intended to serve, and amenities and services that are relevant to the health, interests, and well-being of community members. Throughout the development of these centers, none of these things have been substantively practiced by the City of Manhattan. Due to a lack of equitable community engagement, only 7 out of the 44 members of this project steering committee were from Northview. And not surprisingly, the language that was being used to describe these centers was not that of stakeholders in local projects promoting community needs. Instead, it was the language of shareholders in Manhattan's local sports tourism industry. They described these projects as spaces intended for local indoor sporting events and spaces to generate revenue through sports tourism. Northview community members don't need a recreational center that is designed around sports tourism. What Northview needs, and what we have repeatedly asked that the design of the Eisenhower Center reflect, is a community center, a public, secular space that promotes health and well-being, a space that supports a broad range of activities and services, including educational programs, nutritional and cooking classes, community events and meals, a localized COVID vaccine site, and localized food distribution. That's what the community needs. And we know that because that is what community members have repeatedly stated to city staff and officials. The 7 Northview members on this project steering committee made that clear. They made it clear in 2018, made it clear in 2019, 2020. Here we are, 2021. We're here again. The data and research from the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition and Riley County Health Department on the lack of health equity in Northview make that clear. the repeated explicit advocacy that NVR has brought to the city's attention from city commission meetings to letters and continuous email correspondence with city staff and officials to tonight's petition all make that clear. Despite this, the responses of city staff and officials has been to ignore and reject these stated evidence needs. Mayor Butler rejected the community's stated need for kitchen equipment, telling community members in an email explicitly about this issue that, quote, kitchen items were never a priority, and that the project's amenities exist to, quote, support possible sports tournaments. All city commissioners were included in that correspondence from November 2020, all of you. We've seen no substantive response. The Eisenhower Center is a taxpayer-subsidized project. It must address the needs of the community. Those needs must be defined by stakeholders, not the loudest voices with interest in the local sports tourism industry, and not by people that just don't get equity. Make this a relevant project. Install a functioning kitchen with the equipment paid for by the city, or as you've heard repeatedly, through city staff securing grant funding. Food insecurity is a core challenge for social services in our community, and it's actively harming Northview. If you go out and you talk to the folks, you can see that. A kitchen at the ECC is an equitable way for the city to begin addressing some of that harm. It's also just practical, guys. The city can continue to avoid addressing damage caused to community members by inequitable policies, 100% food desert status, and we're all going to continue paying more for social services that address only symptoms of those policies. Or the city can start addressing some of the root problems proactively. It can save itself and taxpayers money in the long term. It can do the ethically right thing. And it can start supporting equitable projects that benefit all members of this community. I don't think in 20 seconds I can zing you like I want to zing you. And since the courtesy of my time isn't being expanded, I'll leave my comment to that.
Do we have any other speakers tonight?
Thomas Kerrigan, 705 Tuttle Street. I wasn't going to speak tonight. I just came to support Northview Rising. I've been with them for a while. And hearing some of the things and a little bit of the animosity there kind of prompted me to get up here and say what nobody really wants to say, but it needs said. I was on that steering committee, and these things that weren't priority, they were priorities, but this thing was structured in such a way that we were marginalized from the get-go. We were broken up into groups of 7, and each one of us was put in a different group, and majority ruled. We fought hard. We did get the kitchen plumbing and wiring put in as an afterthought, and we got a lot of resistance on that steering committee from that. We don't want that. We already decided that. Well, the architect, I believe, one of the guys, he said, hold on, let's listen. So we did get an in there, and we talked about that. And at this point, the elephant in the room is if this were a pet project of some of the haves in this town, it'd go right through. We don't blink at a $20 million project, but something like this, who needs it? Who's it benefit? What's it do? I'll go back to what you used to say about the ATA back in the day, because I've been coming here for a long time. You saw no need for it. You didn't want to spend money on it, but here you are now, years later, you know, you're trumping it. And so I say, find the money. Do what you got to do. Work whatever you got to do. Make that magic. I don't envy you your job. I wouldn't want to do it. I don't have the temperament for it, but it's got to be done. And equity and equality, totally different things. I think that we need to take a hard look at this, and that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Any other public comments on this topic? Now, this wasn't really an agenda item, so I don't think anybody was really prepared to get into the details on that, or the staff, or even the commissioners. I know we received some emails on it. I don't know, we haven't talked about CIP projects yet in the budget discussion. This probably fits under that umbrella, actually. Would be a citizen request for a CIP project, which would affect really a modification to the Eisenhower Rec Center. It was never designed as a community center. and that gets back into priorities, but maybe we could, add that to future agenda when we talk about CIP, and then we can revisit this when we have some more details on hand. So on that note, that should probably conclude the meeting, so we're adjourned for tonight. Thank you.
I gotta pee.
I was gonna say, yeah, I was thinking about at 7:30 taking a break. No, that's right, there should be. Yeah, 'cause part of